I'm Jacqueline Gelineau, and I'm joined here today with Trevor McAleese, who's the NDP candidate for the Kelowna riding. Now, Trevor, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity.
So you've been out on this, short campaign trail. What are some things that you've identified as key issues facing, your constituents here in Kelowna?
Well, there are a lot of things that are really top of mind. We've got the biggest of big picture issues, people concerned about Canadian sovereignty and what the country needs to do to appropriately push back against, this economic warfare being launched upon us by, the Trump administration. There are also people that are very concerned about what a possible conservative government would mean for people in this country. Especially because, people who are part of the LGBTQ+ community, marginalized people, women more broadly, are very concerned that the Conservatives are going to be following the playbook of the Republican Party and start targeting people for political gain. And that is a very real concern for many people in this community. Mm-hmm. And, just as far as the economics of it, people are very concerned about if they're going to have the same opportunities for themselves and their children going forward, with this back and forth tariff war and what that's going to affect local industry.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned, there's fear of a Conservative Party getting to power. We've, as journalists, hear a lot about the issue of vote splitting mm-hmm. and people wanting to vote strategically. Yeah. It's no secret that both you and the Liberal Party are going to be competing for votes on the left side of the political spectrum. Sure. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I think that there is something to be said for trying to consolidate support around any one candidate. But when it comes to NDP supporters, there are people in this community and across the nation that, they only want to support an NDP candidate. If there isn't an NDP candidate on the ballot, they aren't going to come out and vote. Mm-hmm. Now, the NDP does offer something different. And me as the local candidate, this is an opportunity to really try to bring more people into the process, which is what my strategy has been with this campaign. It's not about trying to take somebody else's slice of the pie. It's about trying to grow the pie. Mm-hmm. Because in the last federal election here, obviously the boundaries have been redrawn. So it's not quite the same makeup as far as what parts are included and excluded. But there was roughly 35% of the population that didn't turn out to vote. Now, it's not to say that 100% of those people are going to be NDP supporters, but if we can bring more people in, at least we'll have a more representative result. Mm-hmm. And as far as fears over splitting the vote, the NDP offers something that is quite distinct from the other parties. We are the strongest voice in Parliament sticking up for hardworking families and marginalized people. And this is something that that sets us apart. We hold governments to their promises and keep them accountable. So I can understand why people are only wishing to support that party. And as far as splitting the vote, when Stephen Fear won in 2015, there was an NDP candidate in the race. Mm-hmm. So, it's on him. If he wants to make appeals to NDP supporters, then come out and do it. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Another key issue, so you mentioned, vulnerable communities, they're disproportionately impacted by the affordability crisis that we're facing here Absolutely. In Kelowna. What are you advocating for to ensure all people are properly housed?
Well, in terms of housing, absolutely. Well, the NDP is quite serious about trying to pursue a national rent control program because, Kelowna, as well as many other communities across the country, we're facing sky-high rents. And it's keeping working people really at an incredibly high level of precarity, where you really are only one missed paycheck away from potentially being unhoused. Mm-hmm. So if we're able to keep rents under control by imposing this kind of control from the top, I think that is a big part of it. Also, we want to rapidly build affordable housing on public land. If we can get, a couple 100,000 units of housing up and running, in the short term, that's going to provide people homes that not only they're going to be able to afford, but we need to be able to provide more than just luxury condominiums. This is something that, especially Kelowna, there's a lot of development going on, but not much affordable housing development. Mm-hmm. And also, we want to make sure that first-time homeowners are able to get a better deal on their mortgages. This is something that we can implement this kind of thing right away. Mm-hmm.
you mentioned, the trade war and that kind of thing. It impacts our industries here. We have a large agricultural sector. We also have a lot of logging, and we have resource extraction, for mining. What would you do to balance the needs of those people who are making money from those industries with the needs of the environment?
Well, I think that there is a lot of room for improvement as far as responsible environmental stewardship. Now, actually, one very good example of this in terms of logging, and this is very relevant for us here in BC, those of us that care about preserving old growth forests, for instance, it is much more economically beneficial in the long term to preserve old growth forests and turn them into managed provincial parks because of the incredible economic activity around tourism that they attract. And as far as resource development and resource extraction, we're going to be having real challenges with our old trading relationships with the United States. But the opportunities for greater interprovincial trade are absolutely there. And in fact, I had an opportunity to meet with the BC NDP Minister of Jobs, Economic Development and Innovation, the Honourable Diana Gibson. And she's been hard at work setting up interjurisdictional agreements to make sure that trucking regulations are consistent across provinces. We have opportunities in this country to sell more to ourselves. We can satisfy our domestic demand first. We don't have to necessarily rely on these old agreements that aren't being respected by our largest trading partner.
Mm-hmm. Going back to the point about the environment and ensuring environmental stewardship, what would you do to ensure people in your riding would not be disproportionately impacted by the impacts of climate change?
You mean as far as trying to mitigate the dangers of, say, wildfires or droughts?
Yeah, and flooding.
Well, there are ways that we can responsibly manage forests. I think looking especially to the way that Indigenous peoples have been doing this for generations, for centuries, for millennia. Controlled burns, for instance. These are things that we can do to try to limit the risk of residential areas being totally wiped out by fire. Mm-hmm. I think that there's a lot of wisdom to be shared from the First Nations community. The Indigenous people have a lot that, we are all on the same team in this one. And there are ancient strategies that exist for us to be able to tackle this.
Mm-hmm. Specifically along the same vein as the wildfires, so the wildfires that happened locally here in 2023, really highlighted the gaps in news content that's getting to the general public.
Sure.
Because of Bill C-18, people are not able to access news on Facebook and traditional means that they became accustomed to.
Sure.
And as journalists, we noticed that a lot of people were then just going without access to information.
Right.
What would you do if elected to address that or amend those discrepancies and ensure that your constituents are being properly informed?
Well, in terms of the phenomenon of disinformation and misinformation on social media, this is one of the great problems of our time, really. The fact that authoritative information is, if anything, it's being purposely ignored in favor of any old person that wants to come across as knowing what they're talking about. Mm-hmm. I think that making sure that our public broadcaster, for instance CBC, and also local media like the Capital News and Black Press. It's important to keep these organizations funded more than anything. I think that the work that local journalists is doing is vital as far as getting the right information out to the right people, especially in the case of an emergency. As far as being able to distribute things on social media, that does become more complicated because of, as you say, that particular bill. And I had an opportunity to discuss this with Kent Mulgad of Kelowna Now, and it's, for better or for worse, people are looking to social media as their primary news source. Yeah. So I think it is a complicated issue. I think that I can understand the logic behind that bill, for instance, wanting to make sure that outlets are compensated for the sharing of their news. Mm-hmm. But I do also appreciate that it is when you have a large social media company like Meta that is trying to bully the government into getting their way, I think that perhaps we should be trying to look at what we can change about this bill to make sure that we can actually get compliance that's enforceable.
Mm-hmm. Another really key issue here in Kelowna is repeat nonviolent offenders. Mm-hmm. What do you hope to see happen or change in the coming years to support our community that's impacted by nonviolent crime?
You mean as far as like property crime, are you thinking?
Yeah, nonviolent crime, repeat offenders, yeah. So
okay.
Like property crime included, yeah.
Oh, sure. Well, I think that the tough on crime approach, the classic sort of conservative approach to really trying to aggressively penalize people, it is missing the root causes of what motivates property crime, which is at its core poverty and potentially mental illness and all the whole bundle of issues that that are forcing people to live on the streets and into destitute conditions. And this is the result of decades of underfunding of social supports and social services. Now, I think that the best way to address these offenses is to be going after the root causes. And if we can meaningfully address poverty in our communities, mm-hmm. then we will see a reduction in repeat offenses. Mm-hmm.
So you've grown up, in the Okanagan region here for much of your life.
Yes.
Within your riding, do you have a favorite area that you go back to find solace or comfort? A favorite area within your riding?
Within the riding, well, there are a number of places in Kelowna that I think are absolutely beautiful. I grew up as a kid in Glen Rosa, so I have a certain soft spot for that. I mean, it's not in my riding technically, but I really think of the Okanagan as one big community. And it's also actually just outside of the riding, but I think the Pandosy Village is actually where our campaign office is. We're sharing it with my colleague, Harpreet, who's the candidate for Okanagan Link West South Kelowna. I do have a soft spot for there as well. I do, though, I think that, even a place like the Cascai Gardens downtown, I think is really an absolutely beautiful part of Kelowna. And that is truly where I like to go to achieve sort of inner peace and solace. It's such a paradise in an urban center.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me here today.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I do appreciate it, Jacqueline.
Thank you.